Sure. Could we do that? That would be really
Oh,
nice
thank
of
you.
you. Thank you. That's very sweet. Don't forget to reclaim it. There we go. Oh, we are live. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. And virtual audience, thank you for joining us. We were laughing because we sold our last copy of the book just a few minutes ago, but a very kind fan has allowed us to use her copy. So we can say that The Exile is, in fact, the new book by Jane Harper. So exciting.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for coming out. It's so great to be back here. So it's been a few years. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. We did a Zoom event in 2021, Jane and I, when she was home in Melbourne and I was home somewhere. But how wonderful to see you again. And one of the lovely things I think about the writing that you do is that you've been touring us around Australia to various regions. You've even done a little jaunt over to Tasmania, if I remember right. Was that the 21 book? It was, wasn't it?
It was. That was the Survivors, yeah, in
Right.
21, yeah.
So Tasmania, what drew you there?
So for that book, the Survivors was set in kind of a coastal small town. It was another Australian mystery, like all five of my books are. And for that one, I just wanted somewhere that was really rugged. And Tasmania is like a really small island state in Australia. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but it's very kind of small, quite small population, and just coastline everywhere. And it's one of the few places that you can dive for shipwrecks and all kinds of things. So it's quite a unique little spot in our country.
It was wonderful to read about it. But in this book, we are in lush wine country, as opposed to, say, the dry, which was not lush, was it? And Aaron Falk, this is his third. I've heard sinister rumors it might be his last, but, is it a 3-act drama with Aaron?
It is. So, yeah, so it's the third and the last book featuring Aaron Falk. So the first two, The Dry and Force of Nature, were the first two books where he appeared. And then I did two standalones, which is The Lost Man and The Survivors. And then I wanted to return to him, but I went into Exiles knowing it was going to be the final book for him, which was quite an interesting sort of writing experience for me, kind of going in knowing that was going to be the final chapter for him. But people sort of asked me, is it because you were sick of him or you wanted to move on? And that's absolutely kind of not the reason. It's actually completely the opposite. Because I've loved writing about him, and I loved writing about him in Exiles. But I think a really important part of being an author is thinking about endings, because strong endings are so important, and they're as important as strong starts. And, it's really, I did not want this to go on past what I felt as the author was really, the viable kind of, the viable journey for him. And, you kind of have to sort of put commercial and financial incentives aside and really try and do what's right for the character and for the book. So, I wanted to give him a really considered, thought-out ending that was right for his character, and that I spent a long time thinking about, and I thought really kind of brought his story to a close in a way that I felt was right, and I hoped kind of gave readers what they wanted as well.
This will sound morbid, but the truth is, over the years, we have had authors writing series who've untimely left us. And what we've noticed is that customers hardly ever miss the author, but they really miss the character. And they can be, no, I'm serious, it's come up quite a lot. And because we've been doing this now for 33 years, so, numbers of authors and customers have aged. And it's true that what happens is that they feel incomplete, the readers, they wanted some kind of an ending for a series. So you've kind of preempted that, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think that the worst sort of case for me would be for, Falk's characters kind of continue on past the point where, I had, good sort of valuable ideas for him, and past the point where the readers were maybe as engaged as they could be. And I really, because I have loved writing about him so much, I didn't want it to fizzle out. I wanted it to be this kind of, conclusion that I felt he deserved. And it was quite a bittersweet decision, because part of me would love to continue writing about him, but I think, it's, he's not a homicide detective. He's not someone with a huge extended family. He doesn't have kind of the backstory that would allow me to really go into, into huge sort of, new avenues with him. And that's just sort of a kind of a factor of, I guess, him being introduced for me as a debut author. You make decisions on a debut book that you've no idea that it's going to become. You're going to end up writing 5 books, or and so you don't maybe build in those avenues that you would if you were starting out to write a character that was going to have 20 books in them. So I think it's really important to be really clear out about, not every character is built for a 20-book series. Some of them, have 3 books in them.
Sure. And actually, for a debut novel, yours was a phenomenal success, became an international bestseller, became a movie and so forth. That was a lot of weight to put on Aaron. And sometimes I found that authors, with that kind of success, kind of freeze. They don't necessarily have another story about that character in them.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, when I wrote The Dry, which was, I'm not sure if everybody's read it, but it's Aaron Fawkes, the main character. In that one, he goes back to this small drought-stricken community for the funeral of a family that he was friends with the father of that family when they were young, and it got made into this great film with Eric Bana recently, and so it was really great to it was amazing. I mean, that book exceeded my expectations. So much really. But I also kind of knew really early on that I didn't just want to write that same book again. And I think it would have been probably an easy short-term solution for me to, for my second book, essentially write, that book again and sort of, and I think there were some readers who maybe wanted me to do that, just produce the same kind of book again and again. But I think that's really a short-term solution, and I wanted to be like a long-term author and keep doing this for a lot of years. So I wanted to kind of rip that band-aid off quite early. So Force of Nature has him in it, but it was a very different setting. And then the next 2 books, The Lost Man and Survivors, are both standalone. So for me as an author, I think that was the right choice.
Well, you're the only person who can decide that. So, yay, you did. Right. So, as I said, we are in lush wine country, which is a gorgeous part of Australia. First time I was in Australia, in Sydney, we went down to, I'm trying to remember, what is that area where the convicts first landed? It's like the Rocks or some such thing. And there's all kinds of little wine tasting and wine little things down there.
Yeah, in the Rocks in Sydney.
It is the Rocks.
Yeah, there is a place. Yeah, there is the Rocks. Yeah.
At my age, I'm having trouble with instant recall. So anyway, and what you can do is you can get like sample 10 or 12 different kinds of wine in one of these little, and they only give you, but it's just Australian wine is so wonderful. I really like the Shirazes, particularly, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of literally world class. I mean, it wins a lot of international awards, and I think I wanted to set Exiles. Yeah, I thought quite a lot about where I was going to set this book. So I went in knowing it was going to be Fawkes' final book, and there are, I guess, a few sort of factors going into it. I mean, the last 2 books, The Lost Man was set in outback Queensland, and that was a mission to get to. Like that involved like hours of like outback driving with a very generous retired cop, and then The Survivors, I had to, for part of the research, I needed to go diving because I had a diving scene in that I couldn't really write without having done it. And I was 12 weeks after giving birth. I was sort of zipping myself into a wetsuit about to dive into these freezing Tasmanian waters, and I thought, this is never again. The next book, we're going to be looking somewhere much more sort of moderate. So I was sort of thinking, where was I going to set it? And part of this in Exiles, it sees Fawkes reunited with his friends Rita and Greg Rako, who we met first in The Dry, and he goes to this small community in South Australia to attend a christening of Greg's newborn son, and I knew I wanted to sort of reunite him with the Rako family, and probably, I'm not sure if anybody else knows or cares about this fact, but the Rakos are from South Australia. That's mentioned very briefly in The Dry. So that kind of turned my head in that direction. And once I was sort of looking towards South Australia, you can't really go past wine country. It's such a kind of pivotal part of that state. It's what they're known for, this kind of food and wine region. It's, a huge kind of destination. And it produces some of the best quality wines, in the country and the world. So it was the research trip for that was a lot easier and more fun. I could say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you know the author? Did you know? Because sadly he's left us. The author Peter Robinson.
I know I know of him, but I've never met him.
And you won't now because sadly he died. But nonetheless, I keep coming back to that. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm in that mood. Anyway, Peter took. I don't remember if it was. It must have been a standalone because this guy was a Yorkshire policeman. Anyway, he set the book in Southern Australia, and he forced himself to do research by actually going to Southern Australia and wine country, and he drank some wine that he really loved, so he put it in the book. And ever after, he kept getting a case of wine because it was such great publicity for that. So did you have the new to...
I wish I'd heard that story before I went. I would no. I wasn't specific enough in any kind of way.
Right.
That's yet to happen. But
it's product placement, Jane.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
On your next book.
Should learn from the greats.
That's right. Absolutely true. I love that. But anyway, Australia wine is wonderful. But one of the things I thought was particularly interesting with Exiles is that he's not there on any kind of an investigation. He's there as a private person going to a christening. He's not going to a scene of a crime or, investigating something. Well, it turns out he is, but he doesn't know that.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, so we see Falk go to this small South Australian town for his christening, and the bulk of the action in the book actually takes place a year after the prologue. So the prologue opens up with this an incident where a baby is found safe and well. I like to say that very early. The baby is fine. It's not that kind of book. The baby is fine. She's sort of tucked up in her pram, alone near the Ferris wheel. But her mother is gone, and all her belongings are still in the pram. And the question is, what has happened to this woman who used to live in this town, has very strong kind of family connections there, but has moved away and has come back, and now she's gone, and her baby's been found alone. And then the bulk of the action then takes place 12 months later when Falk goes for the first time to this town, and he is kind of, moving in close circles with people who knew this woman well. And I thought a lot about the sort of timing of this book and when to set it. And I considered for a while whether to set it, in that kind of immediate aftermath where, the woman has gone missing and it's that kind of heart-stopping moments. But I felt for me, in all my books, I feel that the mystery or the crime is more the catalyst for the story. It's not at the heart of the story, and what's at the heart is the relationships. And I felt like, setting the book a little bit after the event, it just gives the characters more time to breathe, and it allows them to have conversations that you can't have in those urgent, days and hours after something's happened. So a lot of the book is about kind of relationships in the way that, sort of, unspoken truths kind of unfold. When people start to reflect on, what's happened and their role in different things.
I had a conversation with Anna Reyes in her first book last week, was it? Well, anyway, it's called The House in the Pines. And one of the things we talked about was first anniversaries. So in point of fact, it's been a year since this mother was missing. Is there something, do you think, about, anniversary dates like a year that because you could have done this 10 months in or 8 months in or 13 months out?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think absolutely from like an emotional level that, anniversaries of any kind of traumatic event tend to sort of, resurface. People think, this is where I was last year, this time this was happening, or last year, this time it hadn't happened yet. Purely from also a practical writing point of view, I think it helps a lot with the driving the plot because, it naturally leads itself to, reenactments and appeals and, police kind of asking people to revisit their events. So it's a natural way into people kind of revisiting and talking about what's happened, which, is good as an author from the sort of character and plot point of view.
Well, absolutely. And actually, crowdsourcing has become an important part, really, of investigation so often now. Where if things have come to a halt, in a kind of investigation, getting people to a group of people who might have memories or stuff on their camera or whatever it is, but having them revisit it, sometimes they remember something they'd forgotten or they see something differently than it was.
And Falk actually in the book, he sort of reflects on the fact that a lot of people will be coming back to the town for this event, and he sort of laments a little bit that sometimes people they're so keen to help that you get so many different accounts and different points of view that then the challenge becomes actually sifting through them and trying to find out what's relevant and what's not when you've got maybe too much information coming in.
Absolutely. So the actual anniversary is not the anniversary she's missing. It's a festival, or what is it that the town is celebrating, which is when a year ago she went missing?
Yeah, so I wanted to set because I think it's really important when you're kind of choosing a location to bring out those little kind of authentic touch points that make that kind of the people who know that location or that sort of setting would recognize, and also bring it to life people who would never have visited there. So South Australia is a really, as I mentioned, a really huge sort of food and wine region, and a big part of that is kind of festivals, these wine festivals where you have tastings and all kinds of things to sort of celebrate the produce and the industry of the region. So that's where the book opens in a busy festival, which also I think as an author is a great kind of device, because it lots of any sort of venue where there's lots of sort of strangers and people who know each other naturally kind of mingling with each other, and it's dark and there's lights and there's music and there's lots of things going on. So there's lots of opportunity there to kind of raise questions about what's happened.
But nonetheless, in a way, if you're going to have any kind of sensible investigation, there can only be like so many suspects. If the entire world could be suspect in her disappearance, and we don't even know that there's a suspect, right? We don't know why she has disappeared, but you do have to contain it if there's going to be any investigation.
Yeah.
So that would bring back some people who maybe were there the first year, when it happened, but then haven't been there and now they're back again. So you're pulling in that whole circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me as an author, one of the reasons I really love setting the books in kind of small communities or kind of isolated settings is because it's really because what I love as a reader, and what I like as a reader is mysteries where the kind of the question and the answer are both contained within this kind of little bubble of the novel. It's not kind of one of these sort of epic novels where there's a city and there's 1,000 people coming and going, and the sort of the culprit or the resolution is maybe not connected directly with the who's involved at the start. I like those kind of I guess the more sort of classic kind of crime situations where it's it's all there's a set cast of people, and the questions and answers are all kind of contained within them, and it comes back to that kind of my interest in that sort of the relationships, and particularly the aftermath of a tragedy as well, where I think things are very still unsettled and people are still coping with their emotions, and trying to kind of work their lives in a way after something has happened that has really changed the course of their life, possibly in a way that's never going to be quite the same again.
Well, that whole closed circle structure is very Agatha Christie, but it has held up over time. And certainly in The Dry, when you think about it, there were only a certain number of people who could actually, and so you were sorting through them, which, it's not unlike Death on the Nile, for example, where only the people on the boat, one of them had to be the killer, unless you assume that a hippopotamus reared up. Do you all know that a hippopotamus is the most dangerous? I love this because I've been to Egypt several times. The animal that kills most people in Egypt is not the crocodile. It is the hippopotamus. Yeah, who knew that? Just throwing that in, but I keep coming back to death.
Bob, I actually didn't know that because I have two children aged 6 and 3, and I spend almost every single weekend at the zoo. So I actually did know that fun fact because I've been on that tour a number of times. So
right.
It's a good fun fact.
I know. The pharaohs used to throw the bad people to the hippopotami. You just have to really love that. So anyway, here we are in this town now. We don't know why this woman is missing, but the fact that her baby is all by itself, herself is this little girl,
yeah.
Right, is all by herself, neatly tucked into her pram. You have to assume that the mom wouldn't have just left her there voluntarily.
Yeah, and I think, like I just mentioned, I have two kids, and they're 6 and 3, and I think, when I was writing this book, they were, 5 and 2, I guess, and a big part of, I guess, a big part of my kind of working life as a writer has, does sort of my experience as a parent kind of does creep into it a lot. I had my first child in 2016, which is the same year The Dry came out in Australia, and then it came out in the US the following year. So my kind of experience being a professional author and being a parent overlap exactly. Like I've never really had one without the other. And I think that people tell you like it changes, your perception changes when you have children, and I'm not sure if I totally believe that till it happened, but I think it does, and I think that absolutely kind of informs my writing in a lot of ways. And there's certain areas and certain things I would never touch on as an author because I just couldn't bring myself to kind of write about them. And I like to kind of position the books in a way where I feel like I could share them with my my friends who are also parents and have children, and I like to sort of as an author, you get to pick where you position your books, and that's kind of where I choose to position mine.
Well, in case you're thinking that's just a mom thing, if any of you have ever been to one of Michael Connelly's events here, which in fact he has been here for every book he's ever written, he had that experience as a father. It really changed the way that he wrote. Becoming a dad informed, things he would choose to write, things he would choose not to write. And you're right, being a parent, is a profound effect on many, many people. And if you're a writer, it can extend into your writing life as opposed to people who just have to get on with it every day.
Yeah, that's right. And I think with time and everything, you do, your perspective does change on things. I mean, there's certain when I was writing The Dry, which is my first novel, like I didn't have I wasn't sort of pregnant and had my child then. I wrote that before then. But even now, I mean, it's hard for me to sort of say, I would change anything about The Dry because it's changed my life. It's completely transformed, my career, and it's done so much for me. So, it would be hard for me to say I would change a word in that. But there were certain aspects of that around, the opening scene and the death of a family that, to be honest, I actually would not do again, and I don't sort of regret doing it at the time because that was the book that I wrote, and, I'm happy with the book as it is, but it's just as the author I am now. It's interesting how
it was
wouldn't
the
do that
gut
again.
punch of the children. I think that made The Dry so powerful. It was really, really hard.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and I don't disagree, and I don't sort of regret it. Like I don't sort of look at book think, oh, I wish I'd done it differently at all. Like there's not a part of me that thinks that, but it's just interesting how if I was to tackle that sort of book, if I was to tackle that book again, I feel like my mind would go different ways. Just with the experience of having, children of that age myself.
Sure. So we have a missing mother. We have a child who's safe. We have a family that nobody knows, can't find out what's happened to her. And so the theories are, what did happen to her? How could she have disappeared and how could she be got? We're not going to tell you. But nonetheless, that would be, aside from the question of why is the baby there and the mom missing, then the next question is what could have happened to the mom? Did she wander off? Did she have some kind of medical event? Did somebody, there are all kinds of possibilities there, but a year is a really long time for somebody to be missing.
And I think, one of the things that I really enjoyed writing about this book was that there's this very sort of close-knit family structure within it. So the woman who's missing, she has a teenage daughter as well, and she has a baby. And there's a lot of, and Falk's friends, the Reikos, Rita and Greg, they have 2 children themselves. There's a lot of kind of, theories and discussions about motherhood and what's, the pressures that mothers feel, particularly, mothers of new babies. And one of the things I really, I kind of particularly loved writing myself about it was the relationships between Falk and the Reikos and how, they kind of give him a real perspective on family life, and they have such a sort of strong relationship with each other, and they're so sort of gentle towards him in their friendship. It's a very stabilizing relationship for him in his life. And I really enjoyed kind of all the scenes between that sort of trio, and the way that they were able to kind of give him a perspective that he doesn't really have maybe on his own as a kind of a single, sort of middle-aged man.
True, you soften him out. I will say that he does soften up some. But the real question for Aaron is he's not there in any official capacity. He's come for a family event. So, how does he get drawn into trying to figure out what's happened to this woman?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it's one that I thought about a lot actually when I was sort of trying to think what kind of book to write, what his, what Falk's final book would be, because so when I first set out to write The Dry, Falk was, I'd love to kind of have this, great sort of romantic story about how Aaron Falk came to me fully formed, and I thought you're a great character and I'm going to write about you and this book's going to be great, but it really wasn't sort of like that. And for me, characters are always I like to be a bit more blunt about it, especially when I'm speaking to aspiring authors, because I think it's unrealistic to think that characters are going to be fully formed initially, and the characters are always there for a reason. They're there to kind of advance the plot. So for Falk, a lot of decisions were made because it was necessary for the plot. So I wanted him to be someone who had connections with this town in The Dry, but had been away, not as close connections. So he'd lived there for a while, but sort of left under a cloud. He knew the family, but again, not well. So they were old friends, but not people he'd stayed in touch with. He didn't have a strong community there anymore. And I deliberately didn't want him to be this kind of slick homicide detective who came in and showed like the country cops how it's done. So I made him like a financial investigator because he had some policing experience, but it was not his specialty. And so then fast forward sort of 3 books and you're still kind of working, within those parameters that you set for those reasons in the first book. And I actually met this woman who so generously said, call me anytime because I actually work for the AFP in the financial division, handling their communication. So if you want, give me a call and I will talk you through all kinds of stuff that they do. And, and I was like, great, amazing. Like, this is going to be, gold. And I called her and honestly, this poor woman, I spoke to her so many times, I couldn't phone for, multiple hours. And she was so generous with her time and so forthcoming. And I ended up with nothing because the fact is this job is like I found out things like the average investigation takes 7 years to complete. It's almost all done from the office. So I got a bit excited when she was talking about how they can seize sort of proceeds of ill-gotten gains. It's like, great. So did they go out there and break down doors? No, it's mainly done through the lawyers. So it was all this. So I sort of quite quickly realized, I'm going to have to, for Falk's final mystery, it's not going to be like a professional mystery. It's going to have to be something that kind of drives him personally. And he doesn't really have a personal connection with this woman, but he does have a very personal connection with the Reiko family. And I guess by extension, their extended family. And it's really his friendship with Reiko and his kind of, I guess obligation that he feels as a friend to sort of help his friend out that kind of draws him into this mystery and helps him, want to sort of find out what happened, really to put the Reiko family's mind at rest.
So the local law, they haven't shown a lot of result if it's been an entire year. So, it's oftentimes the conflict in a crime novel comes from the law enforcement agencies butting heads with each other rather than I'm sure you've all read books where the FBI has a turf war with the, whatever's going on. Anyway, so he has to tread carefully with the local law if he's going to do any investigating, and that's all we're going to say about that. But clearly he does some investigating, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that really helps him out that it was also a lot of fun to write was the kind of the range of characters who are within this kind of extended family and friends network. And, one of the benefits of having people who have different kind of roles within the group and different ages. So we've got a couple of teenagers, we've got some kids, we've got some people who are, kind of, have had sort of failed relationships within the group. And the thing that is always something I should try and really keep in mind when I'm writing, and I also try to tell aspiring authors, it's worth sort of bearing this in mind, even if you're not kind of thinking about it initially. When you're sort of getting the plot down, is that all these characters will have different perspectives. So everybody is bringing their own kind of life and experience to a situation. So nobody is seeing the situation in the same way. They're certainly not seeing it in the same way as the author and not even in the same way as the main character because they've all got their own everybody brings themselves to a situation. And one of the things that sort of helps Fork out a lot is that, different people have got different takes on what's happened. So the teenagers are kind of seeing things in a slightly different way, and the kids are and the adults are. So everybody's kind of got their own little sort of take on what may or may not have happened.
You did that superbly well in The Lost Man. I think that the narrative structure of The Lost Man was just amazing. And, it was so hard to see the final denouement, which we're not going to reveal in case anybody hasn't read it. But honestly, it's really an amazing book from a structural standpoint. I thought you did that very well, Jane.
Oh, thank you. And actually, that was so. If for those of you who haven't read it, it's The Lost Man is set in a really remote, like super remote cattle station out in Queensland. So, for example, when I went to actually do research, it was an 11-hour drive over the outback, with this retired cop who actually wouldn't sort of let me drive myself. It's that kind of dangerous and treacherous. You have to kind of be sort of escorted, really. And the nearest neighbours are kind of hours apart, and the kids all, nowadays, like, lots of kids have gone to school on Zoom and things, but the kids all went to School of the Air online. And it's a very, very insular community where you've maybe got 65 people flung over this huge area. And in that book, it's set around one family, and there's 3 brothers and their mother and the farm worker and some backpackers and a couple of little girls who live in this cattle station when one of the brothers is found dead. And the challenge with that one was actually coming back to what I was mentioning about people having different perspectives, is with this one family, their experiences are all so similar in a lot of ways. They speak the same. They've grown up literally in the same household. Generations have grown up in that household. So trying to sort of differentiate, but they're very different people as well within themselves. So trying to differentiate different people who have very similar sort of ways of speaking and very similar ideas as well was you've got to kind of really go for the nuances.
You do, but the challenge in that book was it was such a small circle where the crime occurred and the number of people who could have participated in it. So I thought, it's actually easier with a larger cast, isn't it?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, although with a larger cast, you've still got to keep keep them all kind of wrangled, in place. And
right.
And I think as well, the challenge I find a little bit with a larger cast is you've got to make sure they've all got sort of adequate page time. So sometimes you'll have characters because you want all the characters to kind of, they've all got to do some heavy lifting. They've all got to be there for a reason. And a big part of that is making sure that they, by the end of the novel, the finished novel, they all feel, the reader cannot tell which ones are kind of the main supporting characters and which ones are the secondary supporting characters. They've all got to feel kind of real or authentic and fleshed out. It doesn't have to happen immediately in the writing process, but by the end, you've got to get there and have them all feel hopefully 3-dimensional.
A really great mystery, or certainly a great thriller, depends in part on, actually falls on the villain. In a thriller, if the villain's no good, the whole thriller falls flat. But what you can't really do is wind up with the, eventual bad actor not having enough time on the page where the reader has any sort of chance to figure it out. I can think of one classic novel where, I won't mention the name of it, where the murder actually didn't appear until page 257. And, it was like, seriously? It turned out to be a bestseller, but I thought that was amazing to get away with that. In part, part of a mystery, part of the fun, I think, of reading it, is to try to figure it out before you get to the end. But you can't if you don't have enough time with, the eventual bad actor.
No, I totally agree. And I think, one of the things I always sort of say, I try and write books that I would like to read. And one of the books I like to read are ones where you kind of get a fair go. And ideally ones where, you get to the end and you can look back and you can see where the clues were. And you can see like, oh, okay, so I should have seen that. I can't believe I didn't see that. And a lot of that is like, I think as the author is like real sort of trial and error, because in this sort of the drafting process, because none of them really work on you. You have to kind of really take it from a really logical point of view and think, most people, if they see A, they will think ABC. Most people's sort of thought process will follow a kind of a natural track. and it's about giving them that sort of natural track while also planting kind of the clues along the way, in a way that their heads aren't turned from that natural track, and they don't sort of necessarily see those little kind of diversions and the alternates, maybe alternate viewpoints and things until all is revealed, and then it sort of seems hopefully obvious and clear. Because there's sometimes when you have to kind of it's a bit of a leap of faith. You have to kind of lean into that and just trust that people do tend to we all tend to think a certain way, and but sometimes I'll be writing things, I think, oh my God, like they'll definitely get it from this. Like there's this big kind of red klaxon, like clue. But I've sort of grown with confidence over the 5 books, because I find that usually I don't. By the time I send it to the editors, and they're the first readers, and they're really the ones I'm checking, like do they pick it up, and I can sort of tell now on a logical level what ones they won't pick up.
Yeah, one thing you can draw from this discussion is if you're writing a series, you really are stuck with whatever decisions you made with the first book.
Absolutely.
You can't go back and,
back engineer it. That's right.
My friend Laurie King once said that writing a first novel is basically like packing a trunk for a trip. You fold things in, and you don't know if you're really going to need them, but if you didn't put them there, you can't ever take them out. And if you want to change your packings, later, it's too late. And that's an attraction for writing standalones, is that basically, you're starting at zero.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why I really enjoy writing standalones, and because I think my sort of the way I kind of come up with the ideas for the books is for me it's sort of plot first. So it's kind of that core idea first. Something's happened. It looks like this, but what if it's this? And it's that kind of question I'm sort of thinking about, and then quite quickly I'm sort of thinking, okay, if that was the idea, then what's sort of the setting that would support that idea? And then it's like, what are what kind of characters do I need to sort of support the story, and who would I need to sort of tell this? So I'm kind of building it out from the plot. But when you've got like a recurring character, they have to be at the heart of it, and for me that's not my sort of maybe my natural leaning. But it was one thing. It was really good for me to write this book though, because I knew it was going to be Fawkes' final one, so he was at the heart of it, and the entire novel was built around him, which was a little bit of a different way for me to approach things, and it was quite good, just as an author, to kind of try and do it that different way, and realize that I could do it that way, and I was happy with the results, and I was happy with the way it built out, but so it's good to challenge yourself, as in that way as well. But I think for me, their standalones are a much more natural fit, because everything is on the table. You can the whole world is open, really. You're not guided by the decisions you made back in 2014 or whatever.
That's very true. And the other thing, it's a little more exciting for you, the reader, because anybody can die. In a series, Jack Reacher is going to live to get on the bus, right? And ride out of town and come back. Yeah. But in a standalone, nobody except the dog. And you're being very good, I might add. The rule, don't kill the dog or the cat, is high. So I have one question before we open it up that has absolutely nothing to do with your book. But Australia, in this time of climate change, has had some really horrendous climate moments, terrible floods, terrible drought, fires, the whole bit. Is that, something that might fuel a story for you? Or, if you've set it in a place where extreme flooding or extreme fire or something has come along?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's kind of hard to ignore it all.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's something that's very, Australia's sort of very conscious of. I mean, you sort of see it, so much on the news and things, and I mean, people, literally, losing their entire communities, getting washed out and things. So I think, I mean, if I had the right idea that would fit well within that sort of that sort of space. I think one thing that I do try not to do is I like to let the themes kind of emerge from the plot rather than the other way around. So rather than sort of say I'm going to write a book about that sort of tackles sort of climate change in any way, I would rather the plot and the characters were in a position where climate change was a factor and it was part of their lives, and it was sort of woven in naturally rather than go in with that as the first angle.
No, I totally agree. But I was thinking to myself, what an absolute, I mean, it's a terrible thing, but what a gift to a writer.
Yeah.
To have these awful things going on. Well, I mean, if you were in California, you'd have so much to write about. And we've had honestly, we have had more rain in Phoenix since August than Seattle. I mean, how weird is that if you've really been paying attention, I mean, that's almost inconceivable. Yet we still don't have enough water for the Colorado River, but, the whole world, I think, has to react to it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think anything that's kind of a moment of extreme as well is is something that people remark on, and anything that people kind of aware of and conscious of is good kind of fuel for an author. Yeah, I agree.
It really is. So I know you all want to dash home and find out what happened to the woman, but before you do that, how about questions? Anybody? Oh, there's a hand. Jane, you should call on him. This is your show.
You call out. You call out.
Passing the buck. All right, let's start with you.
Do you already know the ending and write to that, or do you change your mind and say, "Oh, that's not going to work"?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the question is, when I start to write, do I already know the ending? And yes, absolutely. So yeah, I even when I'm sort of thinking about the idea for a book, quite often I'm not actually thinking about the opening. I'm actually thinking, about that ending, that kind of moment where you realize what's happened, or the reader is sort of shown what's happened. That's actually what I'm thinking about sometimes in terms of when I'm thinking of an idea for a book. What has happened? There's been some extreme moments. Who is involved? What has brought them there? Who knew? Is it something long bubbling? Is it something spontaneous? Is it an accident? And if this has happened, what could maybe have appeared to have happened instead? So I'm actually kind of working out a little bit backwards from the ending. So what's happened? Where's it being set? Who's involved? What's led to it? And I'm sort of working out. So quite often, I'm sort of working out to the point where I think, okay, so if this is a sort of the story, where's the most interesting place to kind of drop the reader in so that we can start the story and go on together and everything in it is kind of funneled towards the ending. So there's some hugely successful authors who I know start from page one and they kind of write and it sort of, they work it out as they go. I cannot even begin to tell you how they do that. I personally could not. I couldn't, do anything like that. So, but it just goes to show it's, different. There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Every writer's mind works differently. So these two ladies have actually flown down here from Washington State today.
Oh, wow.
Just to see you. So do either of you have a question? No?
Oh.
I paralyzed you by pointing you. I wanted to make sure you realized
absolutely.
that actually. Right. Has anyone else traveled a large distance? No? Not, oh, yes, sir. Where are you from? Oh, you too.
Wow.
Oh, you're all together?
Indiana.
You came from Indiana. Wow. Isn't that impressive?
Thank you so much for coming so far. I thought I'd come a long way, but that thank you so much for coming. And also to the locals as well. Let's not forget.
Well,
I forget you.
the weather's pretty bleak in Indiana right at the moment, so it may not have been entirely an altruistic decision, for sure. Was there? Yes, sir.
Right. I couldn't wait, so I bought online from Dimmicks.
Oh yeah, good old Dimmicks. Yeah.
You've taken us to a lot of great places. I used to live in Melbourne.
Okay.
You've taken us to Tassie and I think to the Barossa Valley.
Yes, well spotted. Yeah, it was, and McLaren Vale as well was the other area I went to for the research. Yeah.
Where are you going to take us next?
Yeah, great. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not just being coy about it. I'm still a little bit undecided. I think there's still a lot of the beauty of Australia is it is such a hugely diverse landscape. So I think there's still a lot of kind of unexplored areas. I mean, I think kind of up north, like Northern Territory would be a great one. I feel as probably potentially the kind of tourist areas, like a kind of Great Barrier Reef type. There's a lot of backpackers and kind of people doing sort of slightly dangerous, sort of experimental hobbies for the first time. And I feel like the mining culture of Western Australia might be quite good, although I have to say researching that would be an absolute pain. I'm working myself up to sort of trying to, could I tackle the research in, getting into those mining communities. And so I think there's still sort of a few, I feel like the flying doctors as well is maybe kind of, that's not really a region, but more kind of they sort of operate all over, but I feel like that is kind of ripe for picking as well. So, maybe any or none of those. I'm not still thinking about it. Oh yes, yeah. I do. So I used to barrack for Geelong, so I used to live there, but now I barrack for Carlton because my husband and daughter do. So you see, you know your Aussie rules. Is it
So-
Collingwood? Okay.
All right, Jane, you have. For the benefit of those who are not Australian, translate the word footy for the rest of us, will you?
So there is. So thank you for bringing that up. So there's a play. There's a character in Exiles who is a former AFL player, which is So Australian rules footy is a bit like I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's sort of it's kind of a bit like rugby, I guess. You know, they sort of. There's an oval shaped ball, there's goals at the end, they kind of kick it to each other, they can catch it, and it's just this absolute kind of religion within some states. I just love it. And I live in Melbourne, which is such a like sporty state. We have the grand final every year, and it's such a kind of important part of our culture that on the weekend the grand final is they actually made the day before that a public holiday, so we could all kind of get our barbecues out and have our friends around and things. So it's so in the book, actually one of my favorite characters to write about was this retired football player who kind of left the game, kind of at his peak and has never really, quite risen to those heights again.
So I'm going to have an Australian moment. Melbourne has one of the world's great train stations. The other great one is in Dunedin is it Dunedin in New Zealand? Well, anyway, whichever town in New Zealand. But Melbourne has this spectacular one, and there's a particular hat that is sold in the Melbourne train station. It is kind of not quite a cowboy hat, but it's a, sorry? That's it. Thank you. An Akubra. So when I was in Melbourne, the first thing my husband did was drag me to the train station to buy an Akubra hat. When we went to Auckland, the first thing he did was drive me to a store so he could buy an all black shirt because he too is into the sports thing. But, it's important that you local color, right?
That's it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, Melbourne's a gorgeous city, and I want to say if you ever go there, it has one of the world's most beautiful libraries. An absolutely spectacular library that you want to miss, and also the botanical garden is great. Anyway, another question? Anybody have? Yes.
Yeah. So the question is, what does my writing process look like? For me. So I'm a big planner. So I would. So the way I do it is I spend probably maybe up to sort of 3 months, not even at the computer, just kind of thinking about kind of testing out ideas and trying to let kind of the good ideas rise to the surface. It's sort of what I'm kind of looking for is that what I mentioned a little bit earlier, that kind of something's happened and could it look like something else, and what would that, how would that all kind of fit together? And it's a bit of a it's hard to sort of really pinpoint when you found that idea, because often ideas are not great. When you think about some great novels, the ideas themselves are kind of nothing. You can describe them in 2 sentences. It's about the execution. And I'm looking for the idea that I feel could be executed well. So something that's got a lot of avenues would kind of support a reasonable cast of characters. And when I sort of feel like I've kind of hit, that sort of idea that I'm looking for. So all the time I'm also making notes, and again, I'd love to say I'm doing it in a quill and parchment paper, but I'm doing it on my phone, on the notes app on iPhone. And then what I do when I feel like I've kind of got it kind of sorted in my head a little bit, then I would kind of go to the computer and then I take all the notes and I put them on a Word file, and I would try and put them in the best kind of chronological order I could, so kind of beginning, middle, end. And so you've maybe got kind of a sort of ideally end up with maybe 20 sentences, kind of, sort of laying out the rough kind of, what sort of happens in the book. And then it's just a question of, this is where it gets kind of, it sounds quite boring, because it is quite boring. You just keep going back and back to it and trying to flesh out those 20 sentences. So you turn into 20 paragraphs and then, sort of half a page. And I find that helps me. Again, some authors do not plan, it doesn't work for them. But for me, I find it allows me to be more creative because I can try out different ideas without committing to thousands of words. So I can see in note form whether it's going to work or not. Mm-hmm. And I get to the stage where I've got a whole plan where it's chapter by chapter, how the chapter's going to start, how it's going to end, what's going to happen, what the reader's going to discover, who's involved. where it's set, there's coffee shops, a beach, whatever. And the entire book will be kind of laid out. So then on kind of day one, when I start like writing, I never really have that blank page fear, because I sit down, I can open up my plan for the prologue, and I'll have maybe 600 or 700 words of my notes, and I'll know exactly what happens in the prologue, and then I can just copy paste that onto a Word document. And then the only job then is to kind of write it nicely. Like, I'm not having to do the heavy thinking. And that allows me to write it kind of quite fast, that draft. And sometimes it doesn't always work, like even as well as you plan. Sometimes things work in the plan, and then when I get to the actual writing of it, I find that there's too much happening. Like, I actually need a bit of a bridging scene to get them from home to the festival or something. And so that then I'd have to kind of rework the chapters a bit. But at that point, I would come out of the writing and I'd go back to the plan, and I'd work it out within the plan before. I don't kind of write live. I sort of think of it. So, but I just feel like writing a book is such a huge undertaking. And I think the thing that kind of paralyzed me for years was not knowing how to, how you got to this kind of finished product of the book. And the way this works for me is separating it out. So separating out those thinking stages, the kind of drafting stages, and then the writing stage just allows me to tackle it a little bit better, one step at a time.
And the lucky thing about crime fiction is it sort of comes with a structure.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. It's not like
Which
literary
makes
fiction
it
where,
easier.
So, and I find it helps, as I said, like to know the ending as well.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, one more. All right.
I don't know. I don't have anything for, but I do know some people would find that really, really valuable. I kind of work like very solo. Like I don't even really tell my editors what I'm writing about. Like I kind of say, oh, it's a mystery set in South Australia, and then and they're sort of, and then I kind of disappear for like a year. And so I just find, because I find for me, it's, especially with crime novels, I think it's really important to keep those fresh eyes, and I'd rather the editors particularly read it completely cold for the first time, so they can see, does it work, and does the ending make sense to you, and things. So I don't really run it by anybody, but I do have a group of like friends. I guess they're friends, yes. So for example, there's this great author called Sally Hepworth, who is an Australian author, who I don't know if you haven't discovered her. She's
coming to see us on April 13th.
You absolutely, she is the most amazing kind of speaker. You will be rolling in the aisles. You should get her to tell you the story about how she wrote a whole, she and her husband had to go to a swingers party for research for a book that never ended up getting kind of off the ground. It's a very PG rated story. It's fine, but she's full of like really great anecdotes. And I've probably sold her book. She's actually a lovely woman. She's a very, but she's just a very sort of vivacious, fantastic writer. She writes a lot kind of, if you like, like Liane Moriarty types, kind of that real domestic noir with like the twisty kind of turns and things. She's well worth discovering. So The Soulmate, I think, is a new one.
Paperback is out this month. I actually send the February book news that I wrote to you. So please, somebody from this audience, come to Sally's and remind me, or you ask the question, or I will blow it. Patrick, attention. Patrick is here with a couple of questions from the viewing audience. So.
Publishers make the decision even when the readers really campaign for more with the author's willingness. Interesting.
Yeah, I guess I'm lucky. My publishers are really supportive in terms of they've when I sort of had this discussion early on, like I felt this was like the third and final book. I mean, their attitude is always they feel like I know best, I guess, within my own book. So and I think a big part of writing this book as well was I wanted to give the readers what I hoped they kind of wanted to see from the character in the book as well. So I feel very comfortable with the decision. I was lucky to publish it sort of were supportive of that.
There's a question about, is that your new dog, Barbara?
You know what? My puppies are at home because they're too ill behaved to come down here. I am such a sucker for this little dog. She's a Havanese, and she is beyond her hairdo. You've got to admit, Jane, have you seen a dog with a hairdo like that? She has this fabulous top knot, and she dances. But anyway, I meant to apologize because I got so distracted when she was playing with me. It sort of interfered with your conversation, so I apologize for that. But I just can't resist her. So no, not my dog.
Not your dog.
But I would kidnap her in a heartbeat if I had a chance.
One question: are there any other? You've mentioned a few, but any other Australian crime writers that we might not be aware of that we should check out?
The person, so I think the Sally Hepworth who I would totally recommend. The other book that I've been completely like pressed into people's hands all year last year, which you probably maybe are aware of already, is what called Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. Have you read that?
It's just come out over here.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay, so I loved this book. It was so great. It's like this it's kind of set around like this kind of really dysfunctional family. They go to a ski resort in Australia, actually, you know, and as the sort of title suggests, they've all got these sort of skeletons in their closet, and it's so hard to describe because it's this really fun, fresh take on classic crime fiction. So the main protagonist is someone who writes about crime fiction for a living. So he's kind of writing his own sort of story, but with reference to these sort of classic crime novels, and it's so fresh and original. I have not read anything like it for years, and I think it's really exciting to see authors kind of take a bit of a challenge and try something just a little bit different. And I feel he succeeded so well. So Everyone in My Family Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson is definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely. Michael Robotham is another one. We're going to do his U.S. debut next week. Sir Larry Gentle, The Woman in the Library, which is up for Aunt Edgar. And I'm proud to say a book dedicated to me because I'm the editor. So that was exciting. And I actually have a couple of books I'm going to give away here to some deserving people from Australian authors. One is Carrie Greenwood, who is actually writing another Franny Fisher. But if you watch the Miss Fisher mysteries, the clothes were outstanding. And then an obscure author, but a wonderful book called Killing Adonis by J.M. Donnellan. Very interesting book. And actually with that title, kind of Valentine-y, only it's really not. Right. And I'm trying to think, there's a new one. Who did we Zoom with last year? That she turned out to be a huge fan of Michael Robotham and fell apart when I asked her she wanted to do the event with me last year. I can't think of her name. Blast it. Right. Anyway, I have said for some time that the Scandinavian noir may be giving away to the rise of the Australian wave. So, and Jane certainly has a lot to do with that. So very exciting. So I want to thank all of you very much for coming this evening, and you too, Puppy. And so what I'm going to give away the books, and then what we'd like you to do is fold up your chairs and lean them against the wall and line up by number. But normally we do this with numbers. But I've decided that tonight, since we have people who traveled, I'm going to give the books for the people who've come the farthest. So, ladies, you look like you could actually read a book called Killing Adonis, which is bizarre but fascinating. And I think, no, it's for them. I have a different book for her. I'm going to give her, would you like the Carrie Greenwood, or would you rather have the bizarre book? No? And then, are you actually from Australia, sir? You live there. All right. Then the gentleman from Seattle back there is going to be the other recipient. How about that?
And thank you so much for all the great questions as well. It's been really lovely to talk to you, and thank you for your interest in the books and for supporting supporting authors and bookshops the way you are by being here.
It's been very, very nice. So let's give Jane a big round of applause. Notice that I did not ask her what her favorite bookstore is.
There's only one answer, Barbara.
No. We're still being broadcast. So anyway, if you will fold up your chairs, and this wall, they will slide off because the bookcase is curved. So if you could just lean them in that direction, and then if you would line up in front of Jane by